Welcome to the Layers and Masking Photoshop course. In the following lessons, we'll be going through a lot of information, starting out with layers and working our way through masking. The course begins with a detailed walkthrough of the basic fundamentals to help you understand and learn about the concepts in Photoshop. Each fundamental is also demonstrated with examples to help you fully understand each concept. Then, you'll get to use the included practice files to follow along with the hands-on project section at the end of the course. Let's get started. Let's go ahead and discuss now what layers actually are. Layers allow you to stack different images, you can stack adjustments, text, colors, gradients, and so many other elements within your document. All of these layers stacked on top of your original image will combine to create an overall effect. You can mask layers, blend them, manipulate them, and so on. Layers are really powerful, and they give you so much potential with your images. I have an example photo with a couple of simple adjustments to it. This is the type of photo edit that I create in real life, so this is actually what you would probably see in my image document. You can see that there's a background layer, and that's my main image, and then I have 4 other layers on top of it, each of them doing different things to the image. Let's jump over to Photoshop and take a look at this image with these layers so you can see how they kind of add up to create this final effect. So here's that same image inside of Photoshop. I have the Layers panel active here over on the right, and this shows that same thing that you saw in that image slide that I just showed you. I'm going to go ahead and start at the beginning. I'm going to hide all but that background layer so you can kind of get a view of what it looked like before I started adding these layers to this image. The first layer I added was a color balance layer. I took away some of the reddish color tint in the photo and just kind of balanced things out a little bit. Next, I added a black and white layer, but as you can see, I didn't convert the image to black and white. Instead, I blended this with a blend mode along with a lower opacity to give it a different look. Next, I added a curves adjustment to add a little bit of kind of that matte faded look along with some subtle contrast. And then lastly, I created a dodge and burn layer, which helps to manipulate the light and contrast in this scene. And as I toggle that off and on, you can kind of watch the image to see that effect change. So with all of these layers stacked together, I was able to change the look of this photo. In the next video, I'll be discussing some of the benefits that you have when working with layers. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the benefits of working with layers and kind of why they're so important. The biggest thing that layers do is they allow you to work non-destructively on your photos. If I was only editing a background layer or the pixel layer basically, all of those changes are burned into that layer. If I wanted to make edits or make changes to that, I'm unable to because everything is on one single layer. However, when you have things on separate layers, that original image is still intact. And that gives you a lot of flexibility with working on your photo, especially if you need to go back and make changes. And that goes to my second point. Layers can be re-edited. If you're working with an adjustment layer, you can go in and make changes to the settings. If you have a layer that you did, let's say, cloning on or dodging and burning, if you don't like the way it looks, you can delete the layer and start all the way over, or you can just edit that layer itself. If you have an image for a client that you're working on and they see something in that photo that they just don't like, having layers in your document actually allows you to go back and change that instead of having to start all the way over from scratch. Another interesting thing about working with layers is that the order that the layers are stacked will actually affect how your image will look. The topmost layers will always affect what's below them. For example, if you have a black and white adjustment at the very top of your layers panel, that's going to turn every single thing below it into black and white. But let's say I had that black and white layer at the top, and then I decided to add some type over it that was bright red. That type layer would be red because it's above the black and white layer. Another thing about working with layers is that they can be masked for selective adjustments. And what I mean by this is adding an adjustment only to a specific area of an image. Think a black and white adjustment with some color of the original photo peeking through. And that's only one example of a selective adjustment with masking. And of course, we'll be discussing masking in later chapters throughout this course. So let's take a look at these two examples here. Both of these photos look pretty much identical. It's the same scene, but they were edited slightly differently. Let's take a look now at the layers panel associated with these images. So with the image on the left, I have that background image, and then I have 3 layers on top of it that are affecting the way it looks. However, with the image on the right, I used the same adjustments, but instead of using the layered adjustments, I made the adjustments directly to that background layer. So the result is pretty much the same, but the difference is I can go back to that image on the left and make changes to it. Let's jump into Photoshop and actually take a look at these photos so you can really see the difference between the two images. Here I have these images both opened into Photoshop. Right now we're looking at the image with all of those layers, and you'll see it over there in the layers panel. I'm just going to jump real quickly back and forth between the two. So here's the image with only the background image and no additional layers. And if I kind of jump back and forth, you can see that there are some subtle differences, but for the most part, they look pretty much the same. So with the image that actually was edited using layers, let's go ahead and take a look at those layers over on the right. I'm going to go ahead and hide all but the background layer, so now you can actually see what that image looks like beforehand. I added a black and white adjustment. Then I also added some dodging and burning, and that just kind of helped highlight some of those rocks and give it a little bit more interesting contrast. And then the last one, I used a LUT, or a color lookup adjustment, to add a little bit of styling to that photo. So I can see that I have that before and after. And what I could do here is, if I wanted to make any changes, I certainly could do that. So let's say I wanted to change something about that color lookup. I could go into that 3D LUT file, and I could kind of play around with some of those different settings. And because this is a black and white conversion, it's only making some subtle adjustments, but it is making changes. I could also go into that dodge and burn layer, and maybe I wanted to make some adjustments to that layer itself. So I could jump into my brush tool and maybe add a little bit more lightness to the scene. And don't worry, guys, I'm going to show you how to dodge and burn in a later chapter. I'm just kind of showing this for a quick example to give you an idea of what you can actually do with layers. So then I'll switch my brush over to a black brush to maybe add some contrast and some dark areas. And I was just able to re-edit that dodge and burn layer. Now let's jump over to the image without layers and see what we can do. Well, there's not a lot we can do with this image. This image is completely edited and completely flattened. I'm not able to make any adjustments to any of those layers after the fact. I can adjust and manipulate what I have in front of me, but I can't remove or take away anything. Like if I wanted to start over with my dodging and burning, I'm not able to do that. For this image, I actually use the dodge and burn tool, which I actually use very infrequently because I prefer working with layers for that type of editing. Now, of course, if I had just edited this entire image, and let's say I have my history panel available. So let's jump over to the history panel. So I'll go up to Window, History. So you can see here that the only thing I've done here is I've opened the file because I edited this before I actually brought it into this presentation. If I'd been working on this right now and I made a bunch of changes, all of those steps would be listed here inside of history. And yeah, you can kind of play around with the history, but everything is edited in a linear fashion, meaning first I added the black and white, and then I added the dodging and burning, and then I added the color effect. If I wanted to change my black and white edit, I would have to go all the way back to the beginning, and I wouldn't actually be able to retain those other edits, and I have to start all over again. So I hope that this kind of shows you the value of working with a layered document. The fact that you can re-edit it and make all of those changes after the fact is a really big deal, and it adds a lot of flexibility to your editing. let's go ahead and talk about the Photoshop workspace. And what I mean by that are the panels and the things that you actually see aside from your photo that's opened. Right now I have the Essentials workspace open, and this is kind of the default one that you'll see when you first open Photoshop, or if you've never changed it, maybe you're still using this one. Workspaces can be changed and saved and deleted and shared, so you can actually create your own setup for what works best for you and your workflow. For me, I prefer to have the Layers panel kind of front and center. So the Layers panel is down here on the bottom right in the Essentials workspace. And by the way, if you want to see which workspace you're using, go to that little drop down on the top right. And right now you can see here, I have that Essentials workspace active. So I'm going to take that Layers panel and I'm just going to drag it off, and that just kind of removes it from being docked over there in the bottom right. Then I'm going to take this and I'm just going to kind of go back to the right till I see that blue line, and then I'm going to release. And now I've docked the entire Layers panel over here, so I have it kind of a lot more accessible and really easy to see. You can also resize the panels, so I'm just going to hover over the left until that double arrow appears and then drag it to the left. Another thing you might want to do inside of the Layers panel is view your thumbnails a lot larger. So I usually keep mine at the largest setting, and to check that, go to one of the image thumbnails. The background layer is usually going to be the easiest one to access. Right-click over that, and here you have where you can select from no thumbnails, small thumbnails, medium, and then large. So I like the large ones because I really like to see that thumbnail front and center. I'm also usually working on a pretty large monitor, so I'm not too worried about that extra real estate space that it's taking up. But if you have a smaller computer, you might want to set those to a smaller setting. So if you have a big document with a lot of layers, then you'll be able to see most of them there in your Layers panel. If you would like to kind of change around the workspace on your own, you can close other workspaces. So maybe the top right here, maybe you're just not worried about color, swatches, gradients, and patterns. If you click this little drop down here on the top right, you can close the entire tab group, and that just gets rid of all of them. If you see this little skinny one right here, that means that you can either click on it and it will kind of like pop up there to see what you've done. You can also click the little arrow, and that's just going to push it out so you can see more of it. But you might want to also remove these. So go ahead and close the tab group. If you just select close, it's only going to close the active tab there. So you saw I got rid of comments. So I'll just go ahead and close all of those. And now I've just kind of tidied things up a little bit more. If you'd like to see what other types of panels you can kind of move around and play with, go up to that window drop down. And this is where you can access all of those panels. For example, you might want to see a navigator view. Of course, it put it in a really strange spot there. Normally, I would push my navigator up on the top right because a lot of the time I like to kind of see that smaller thumbnail view of my photo. That's what people are mostly going to see when you share it online, is a smaller thumbnail view of it before they see the bigger version. So I like to keep that navigator there in the top right, so I always can just kind of reference it to see what my photo looks like as a smaller size. So once you actually get your workspace set up the way you want, you can actually save it so you can access it at any time. So to do that, you would just click that drop down on the top right and select New Workspace, and then you just give it a name. If you've also made some other customizations to any of these other things, you can change that as well. I usually leave those unchecked because mostly for my workspaces, what I'm concerned about is the panel locations and where everything is visible. Another thing you can do is reset your workspace kind of back to its default. Right now, I'm actually still inside of the Essentials workspace. If I take that drop down, you can see that Essentials is still checked. So I'm just going to reset this, and it brings it back to kind of its default where everything should go. And this is really helpful if you happen to have your own workspace that you like to use and you've moved things around a lot. Resetting it is just going to kind of bring everything back to where it should be. Now, if you don't want to mess and fuss with creating your own workspace, I've actually included a workspace for you to download. Now, this workspace I'm including is the one that I use every single day inside of Photoshop. From time to time, I might adjust it and change it around. You may or may not see me using it throughout the videos in this course. It just kind of depends on what I'm working on. And of course, when I'm teaching, I want to make sure that certain elements are highlighted and more visible when some things may not be applicable to what I'm showing you. But if you really want to work with a good workspace that I've found is helpful when editing photos, then go ahead and download it. And I'm going to show you right now how to import that. So once you've downloaded that file, you want to go up to Edit, Presets, Export, Import Presets. Make sure you have that Import Presets tab at the top, then go down and click Select Import Folder. You want to find the folder that contains that nicolesi.psw file. Once you're inside of that folder, here I just have it in my Downloads folder, go ahead and click Open. Then select what you want. In this case, there's only one preset to import, so I'll go ahead and click that. I'm going to add it to the right into the Presets to Import panel. Then I'm going to click Import Presets. Now you may need to restart Photoshop, so I'm going to go ahead and do that real quickly. I rebooted Photoshop. Let's go ahead and see if that workspace was imported. So I'm going to go over to the top right, and now I can see that I have that Nicolesi workspace added. So this is what the workspace looks like. I have the Layers panel, really easy to see and access. On the right, I have the navigator, so I can see that thumbnail preview, along with the histogram if I wanted to kind of go back and forth and view what the histogram is telling me about my image. I have the Adjustments panel here. This is a good one to have access to pretty regularly. I also tend to use the Creative Cloud libraries, so I've added that to mine as well. If you don't use that, you can go ahead and remove it. Down below are the Properties panel. This is going to be what you actually see when you edit things. So if I go up to that color adjustment, now I have the properties for that specific adjustment layer. And then I have the History and Actions panels here. I tend to reference them from time to time, so I find them useful. Now, if you went up to that top right and you did not see that Nicolesi workspace, you may need to add it manually. To do this, you'll need to access the Workspaces folder on your computer. So this is what it looks like on a Mac. Here I have the instructions for both Mac and Windows. So if you are unable to view that workspace after going through the import preset process that I showed you, go ahead and pause here and find this location, and then you just simply need to copy and paste that nicolesi.psw file over into the Workspaces folder. Then reboot Photoshop, and that workspace should be accessible in that top right dropdown.